It's time to stitch the rest of the houses and the ghost for the Boo-tiful Neighborhood Hoop Studios subscription box. I'm ready to stitch out the next 3 houses and the little ghost to finish this Hoop Studio Boo-tiful Neighborhood series. And I'm not going to go into quite as much detail. I did the first house and had a lot of detail, and that's a pretty long video, so this won't be quite as long. I am going to change the colors. I am working on the tall house from last year, and I am going to do the house orange, and I think I'm going to do the roof gray and the underneath side of the roof this orange. This really won't be seen. This is a different kind of a roof, and so you might be able to see the orange kind of on the side, but looking straight on, you know, depending on how it's pressed, you may or may not see it on the edges. And so those are the changes that I'm going to make for this tall house. And then I have the chiffon, the white chiffon for the windows. And I didn't show this in the last video, but what I do on my USB is I made a folder for the house 1 and 2, which is from last year. And then I made a folder for house 3 and 4, and I just put those files in so that they're easy to find. So I will go to the house 1 and 2, and I've stitched out the little house. And so now I'm going to stitch out the taller house. I'm going to start with the back. So I will choose the back, hit set, and it fits right in the 5x7. I'm going to go to embroidery, and then I always like going to this plus minus needle in case I need to go back or forward stitches or steps. And so this is going to be, again, the same as the last house. I'm going to do the placement line for the shape form. I'll place the shape form down, tack it down, trim it, and we'll get to that step. After trimming the shape form, I'm going to take my little seam ripper, and this does not have a ball on the end. However, this is dull, and if yours has the ball on the end, you do want that down. And the first thing to do is just cut the stitches at the top and the bottom of this little rectangle, and then I'm just going to again turn that down and just slide it parallel as possible. And we're not cutting the stabilizer, we're just cutting the shape form. And so I will just slide, and this cuts a little slit so that we can fold this, but the stabilizer is not cut on the back. All right, so now the rest of the house is just pretty standard. I will do the placement for the fabric, place the fabric and tack it down, and then run the embroidery. The first part of that placement didn't catch my bobbin. It looks like it caught starting about right here. So because this is just a placement and I know where to place that, I don't need to restitch that. If it was a tack down, then I would go back and restitch. But now I can just place my fabric and we'll do the tack down for the house. So the back and the side are done, and that was a really quick stitch out. So now I'm going to get ready to do the front of this house, and I will do all of the tack down of the shape, form, and trimming and the fabric and some embroidery, and then I'll stop when I get to the windows. But it's pretty straightforward and pretty much the same as this, other than just different embroidery. All right, so let's start the front. So I did the embroidery for the shutters, and then it does the cutting line for the windows. So there's 4 windows that need to be cut through completely, including the stabilizer. And they do say to use a seam ripper. I will use a seam ripper and get as close as I can to this stitching, and then probably have to come in and do a little bit of trimming with some scissors. These are tiny little windows. You can see it's, compared to my fingernail, it's about as big as my fingernail, and then we've got this little circle. All right, so I'm going to get these cut, and so I have a little mat on my wool mat so that I can kind of poke and not poke into my wool mat. This time go right by and make sure you have a sharp seam ripper and try, your best. I was pretty close. That cut really nice. To not cut the stitches. Those stitches are holding all 3 layers together. And so if you cut, one little section, it's not that critical. You just don't want to cut a whole bunch and then have those layers separate. And I will just go around each window and do the best that I can cutting these out. Okay, I think that looks really good, and that was really easy with that seam ripper. All right, I'm going to do the other 3 windows. I got these cut out, and so now I need to flip the hoop over and tape down the chiffon. Now remember it's doubled over, and I did press it and use best press. So now I'm going to tape it to the back, run the satin stitches for the window, and then I'm going to add the fray check around the stitching. I'm going to let that dry and trim the chiffon, and then we'll continue with the embroidery and the applique of the door. The front of the house is done, and I love it. I love the fabric that I chose and the cute little windows. You can see how tiny that chiffon ends up being after the satin stitch. All right, so now it's time to move on to the roof. The roof has all the same first steps where I will do the placement line, I'll place the shape form, tack it down, and trim it. And the only thing different is, of course, other than the shape, is that on this roof there are 3 of those little guides that I have to cut with my seam ripper. It's all the same where I will slice through the shape form but not the stabilizer. And then after doing that, it will be just, putting on the fabric, tacking it down, and then doing a little bit of detail stitch. All right, let's get to that point. The roof is done. All I need to do is put the backing on. And again, I'm going to use the dark orange that was actually meant for the house. And this is an envelope style backing, so the two pieces will overlap in the center to be able to, you know, turn this roof. So I have pressed one edge over, and in order to find the size that I need, I am going to place this over this door. So in the directions, it shows that this fold or this opening of this envelope kind of aligns with the side of this little arch, which, you know, isn't probably the best, but it's really the only way to get enough of an opening to turn this large piece, especially with these two little tiny pieces of the front of the roof. Again, with the other piece, I am not going to fold under. Now, their directions do say to fold both sides so that you have two finished edges, but the side that is towards the inside does not need to have a fold, and I'll show you. If you saw the first video, I'm doing exactly the same. So to mark and know how much to cut of this fabric, this first piece I'm going to line up on this side, and then I just need it to go at least 1/4 of an inch, but definitely more to stitch down because I've got to cut it to 1/4 of an inch. So here is the stitching, and I just need to cut out here. So I'm just going to make a little snip, and that is where I will cut this piece. Now, since this piece doesn't need to be, you know, perfect, and it's definitely bigger than it needs to be, here's that little mark I made. So I'm just going to fold this piece in half. I could go and use my rotary cutter and line it up and cut it nice, but I don't really think that that's necessary as long as I have it big enough. So here is that little mark that I made, and I am just going to try to get it fairly straight, and I'm just going to cut. So this is the first piece, and you can see it's much wider than I need, and I can trim it down. So now the second piece, I'll kind of just do the same thing. I think what I'll do is just take this piece and measure from the folded edge and measure it the same size. I don't need to fold this. Now, if you're following the directions and you want to fold, you would fold it and then cut. But I can just cut this about the same size. So now what I need to do is, because I have not folded both sides, it's going to matter how I place these. So the first thing I'm going to do before putting those down is I am just going to glue base this. I want this fold to stay tacked down. And so I am just going to use my glue, baste it, and put a little bit on. I'm just going to use a toothpick instead of having to clean out the nozzle. So I will just dip a little bit in, and I don't need a whole lot. I just want a little bit so that I can get this tacked down. And then I do need to iron it. I think you could also wait for it to dry, but that's the great thing, is that this is like fast and furious when you heat it with an iron. So now I have that tacked down. So now, again, it's important where I place this folded finished edge, because I only have one, needs to be laid down first. And you can see it's much longer than I needed, but I just used that whole piece of fabric. So I am going to lay it a little off of center. That's kind of what they show in the picture. And again, this doesn't have a right or wrong side because it's a solid. If you have a fabric that has a right side, you need to place the right sides together. So right side down, and your fold will be up. You'll be able to see where you folded it. Now I'm going to take the second piece. Again, this has no fold, it's just raw edges. I'm going to make sure I'm way past where it needs to be trimmed, but I also need to make sure that it is overlapping enough. I think I'm going to do it a little bit more, but probably a half an inch. That was probably fine. So that looks good. And again, it's very important if you're doing it the way I'm doing it. The folded edge, right side down, gets put on first, and then the raw edge where there's no fold needs to be put on top. And that's because once it's sewn together and flipped, the folded finished edge will be on the outside. All right, so let's finish this up. Oh, I wanted to mention that I am going to add a little bit of tape. Now, they do tell you to tape this whole section. You don't need to tape this whole thing. It's going to go around the perimeter. I am just going to use my little turning tool and make sure that the foot doesn't get caught and under this top piece. And so that's why they suggest taping this. Now I need to trim 1/4 of an inch, and then I'm also going to cut the corners diagonal and kind of notch around this part so that it can, when we turn it, can be as flat as I can get it. And then I'm going to turn it inside out and press. So now I'm just going to turn it inside out. And these are quite small, and so we'll have to work at that. Okay, that looks really good. So you can see that this inside raw edge does not need to be folded, and it would just have added another layer. And it's just important how you place these before you stitch this together, is you don't want that raw edge on the outside. All right, so it definitely needs to be pressed. But I like that, and I don't mind that. If I see the orange, I'm not sure, how much orange I'll see, but if I see a little bit of it when it's on the house, I think that would be great. But I am just going to press it. That laid really flat when I notched those little, kind of like little V's into this curve. That's what helps make this lay flat. So I am going to use the Heat and Bond tape that I used for the first roof, and I'm just going to press the tape, peel the back, press it again, and that will seal that envelope opening. So here is the little roof. I love it. I gave it another press. I sprayed a little bit of best press to try to, get that as flat as possible. The back is sealed up and it's ready to go. Now these 3 areas that we sliced the shape form is where the roof bends, and that will be put on to the little peak of the house. And I think it'll be fun to be able to see the orange from the side and a little bit from, kind of looks like super tiny piping. So I love it. So our second house is done, and now I'm going to move on to the newer houses, and they are basically the same techniques. And so we'll just get through them. I'll show you what fabrics I've chosen. I am making a few changes, and if there is anything that's a little bit different, then I will stop. But otherwise, we can get those next 2 done, and then we'll put all the houses together at the same time. So the directions say to trim the bottom of this gable, and then trim, it would be straight from the bottom up in just a 90-degree to get everything outside of that triangle away, not by the peak. So now it's done the trimming guide to trim out all layers for the window so that we can put the chiffon behind. And they do have different instructions. First, this did like a triple stitch. The first set of houses from last year only did a single stitch, and the other thing that has changed is that they want, before cutting the window, they want the fray check just put along this. And so they must have, had feedback when they did their first houses that outline stitch, or the trimming guide that only just did a single line, probably didn't hold up. You saw I cut a few, and there's only one, row of stitching, and so that's changed. And then I'm wondering if putting the fray check on will just help, once this is dry, to be able to cut smoother, or maybe not have as much fraying, so that it's a little bit easier to cut. So we'll try it this way and see how it works, but I do need to let that dry. After I cut the window out, then it's the same steps as far as on the back of the hoop. I will place the chiffon. It is again doubled, and I've ironed it and pressed it with best press. I'll tape that on the back, and then it will do all of the satin stitching for the window and a few more of the embroidery details, and then this first part of this house will be done. Okay, I liked that even better. So I ended up pressing with an iron to just dry the fray check. It cuts, I think you can see, I mean, my cutting's not perfect, but it cut a lot better with that fray check. It was, um, you know, very sturdy and not just like fabric, even though this is backed with, an interfacing. And you can see I was able to get closer and it just felt better because it was a little stiffer. So I kind of wish I would have read those directions before I did my other two houses. All right, so now it's going to just finish with the chiffon and the rest of the detail. The back is done, and there is just one little jump stitch between these little slots on the window. That's such a cute touch. I love the little wrought iron detail. And you can see, behind the chiffon. So cute. All right, so this one is done. So I am going to go ahead and add the fray check, and I'm going to let that dry while I start the next house or the next part of this house. So I'm cutting the chiffon from the back of the house that I just finished for these two windows. I forgot that I had it pretty high up, and so it ended up stitching, under that wrought iron piece. It's not a big deal, and I have enough piece to do these other two windows. I have the third little house done, and I wanted to know a few things that I did a little bit different in the directions. Now, let me point out quickly that the directions for this fourth house are only written directions. In the first two houses from last year and the first house in this book, they all have step-by-step picture directions as well as written, and that's kind of what we're used to with Kimberbell projects. However, on this last house, and maybe they figured it's your fourth house probably doing it, and they just did written instructions and not, step by step. They're the same steps, just different design and different size. And so with that being said, because I didn't have the pictures to look at, and you would think I would know since this is my third house, but once again, I forgot to trim the chiffon right after I did the satin stitch of the windows. And so there is chiffon under the door and up here because it extended. Actually, no, it didn't. I think my tape, I had to rip my tape off. So it's just the chiffon is just under the door. Does that make a big difference? No, but that's a step that I forgot. I also want to mention that the directions do say to change to a dark bobbin or matching bobbin for the satin stitch for the windows, and I have not on any of my houses. And that's just mostly because I haven't had an issue. You can kind of tell it looks like I changed it because you can't really see the bobbin thread, but I do have the white bobbin in. Now, the few things that I did different, they have two different colors listed for the quilting, which are kind of the slats on the house, and a different color for the satin stitch. I used the same color. They had two different colors for the steps, one to fill in the steps, and then a darker color for the outline of the steps. I really didn't have a darker gray, so I just did the same color, and that's about it, other than, of course, I used a different color fabric. Instead of that maroon, I used purple. Oh, I did change the color of the doorknob. The doorknob is supposed to be black. I just didn't think that was going to show up on this dark purple, so I just changed to my gray thread, did the doorknob, and then the same gray did the steps. So those are the changes that I've done. So this one is done, and I just need to do the roof. The roof is going to be the same as the other roof, so I will just speed through that and show you some pictures of that. The same with the fourth house. And then, of course, the roof for the fourth house will be the same. All 4 roofs are the same. They have that shape form, and then there's some background quilting on top of the fabric, and then it's that envelope backing, and I'm doing them all exactly the same. So I am done with the fourth house, and I love it. So I have quite a bit of changes that I did with this house, mostly because I chose a dark background for the actual house. So the first thing is, while this was finishing stitching up, I decided to use the kind of this darker orange that came in the kit for the underneath side of the roof. This is going to be the roof. And if I would have decided that earlier before I started stitching the house out, I would have made a different choice for around the windows. I would have used this dark orange color around the windows, again, if I had decided on the roof. So I did have to make, again, several changes because of the dark fabric. So the spider webs were supposed to be black. They wouldn't have shown up, so I stitched those white. The fence was supposed to be either the shadow color or black. I can't remember, but again, that wouldn't have showed up, so I just did the light gray. I changed the door. It was originally orange and I changed it to gray. I did do the shadow around that. I felt with the fabric that was an okay choice. The windows were supposed to be shadow, and I don't think that would have been able to be seen with the windows. So anyways, those are all the changes that I made. I love it. And so now I just need to finish up the roof. I'm going to do the roof exactly the same.